Hello and welcome back to the Data Privacy Lawyer. My name is Funmi Owolabi and I'm the principal attorney at the firm. Today's review, we're going to be looking at a privacy statement. So I wanted to take a look at this organization because not only am I a visitor to their site, but they actually provide hosting services for my website. So I thought it would be valuable to take a look at their notice. Now you might see different iterations of this title from privacy statement to privacy statement. Some organizations will refer to the document they leave on their website as a privacy policy. Others will refer to it as a privacy notice, and others will refer to it as a privacy statement. They are often used interchangeably. I guess my opinion on that is geography. Geography may influence why the name of the statement varies from country to country, or just personal preference by the business. But essentially what consumers should know about this is it's really important for companies to present notice if they're going to process personal data belonging to individuals. And based off of the privacy principle of transparency, they need to be transparent about their privacy practices. Now, one thing that a notice on a website generally does not do is it doesn't ask for your permission. Companies are not asking for your permission on how they process your personal data based off of their notice. The notice tells you what it is they're already doing. And this is why I think it's really important for companies to add a date in which their statements are last revised, because it gives consumers insight into what the privacy practices were up until this day. One thing I want to add here is companies are ever evolving the types of products that they have to offer. I'm going to quickly click on something that did not exist a couple of years ago. This GoDaddy Aero provision, this service, this is new, right? I've had GoDaddy as a hosting service, I think for 6 years now. And this was not a provision they had those 6 years ago. This is new, right? Now, let me tell you the implications or opinions I have about the introduction of this particular product, right? Let's say, for instance, 6 years ago, they didn't have this product. And then they also didn't have this web page. So the types of tracking technologies that may exist on this web page now influence how the entire website works. And if it includes the processing of personal data, that needs to be relayed to the consumers who are going to click on this page, which is why the revision of your notice needs to be done periodically. At the beginning of the Data Privacy Lawyer, I spent a lot of time talking about the need for revisions to be done as and when a business is optimizing and upgrading the products and services it has to offer, because it influences the representations you're making to your consumers on your notice, right? You're not asking for your consumers' consent. You're telling them what it is that you're doing. If what you are doing does not align with your notice, then you're not following the principle of transparency, right? So it's a loop. So let's get into the actual notice. This was last updated, I'm guessing, October 2025. Now we've got all of the entities, right? We've got here the privacy notice describes the privacy practices. Again, I have said many times that a notice isn't asking for your consent. It's letting you know what is being done. And if you have comments or questions, you can then reach out to the organizations at the bottom, right? Contact us. If you have questions about what we are doing, then contact us. But they're not essentially asking for your consent. Now, what's valuable to note in a notice is the provisions that a company is generally relaying to their consumers is based on their obligations under the respective data protection laws. Now, that is a very wordy sentence, but in very simple terms, the companies need to take a look at which privacy laws apply to me. Is it US state privacy laws? Tick, right? And when I distribute things to clients, I always have them tick a checklist in terms of which countries do they provide their products and services and which countries do they process personal data. Those are very different, and companies need to be very clear on the difference between those two questions. So it's really important to outline the laws that apply to you, because that influence your notice, right? And it influences the obligations you have within each notice. You'll see in a lot of notices offered by companies that process personal data in the United States, generally at the bottom of their website, you'll see something called "Do not sell or share my information," right? The obligation to place that type of button on your website is a US state privacy obligation. That is not something that's required in other geographies, right? And companies need to be aware of that. What am I required to do based on where I process personal data? And you need to list that out, which is why there's so much variance from notice to notice. Now, the reviews I do on my channel are without understanding the full context of geography. So I can never say that a company is doing something right or wrong. I can only give a general overview of certain privacy principles that are present in every privacy legislation, like the requirement to provide notice about your privacy practices, the requirement to use only the data minimally required, the requirement to be transparent about your privacy practices, right? The requirement to set the appropriate tone for your audience, right? Those foundational requirements apply from geography to geography, which is why I think it's very interesting to look at a lot of these notices and see what companies are doing. But aside from that, you can see here, right, I talked about how for many reviews, I don't know the geography. But here they've listed that we also maintain customized local privacy notices for certain jurisdictions. This is basically based on the law, right? And that's why I've spent so much time on this section, because I think it's valuable for businesses to really take into consideration the fact that it doesn't matter that you are based in the States. What matters from a privacy perspective is where you process personal data and whether or not you meet the thresholds in those countries. And the thresholds vary from state to state, from jurisdiction to jurisdiction, and from country to country. Now, that's why we can see here GoDaddy has identified the fact that they have unique privacy notices for those in Australia, Canada, Europe, and the United States, right? And I talked a lot on this channel about how in the United States, in just less than a decade, right, we now have over 20 privacy state laws specific to states, right? That's huge. That's huge in less than a decade, right? And so if you are going to be providing your products and services in the United States, that's definitely a consideration that you need to have. Now, whether or not you choose to have a local privacy notice or just dictate it in your global privacy notice, that's a business decision. But the foundation here is that you need to present notice prior to processing personal data, and you need to identify where you'll process personal data first to understand what your obligations are for your notice that you present on your site. The other thing I always talk about is scope. Now, I mentioned at the beginning of this review that I personally am a GoDaddy customer. I give them money every single month. They host my website. So let's take a look at whether this applies to me or this is exclusive as I interact with the site as a visitor, because that matters, right? Privacy, we're not just looking at geography, we're also looking at data subject. Now, data subject just essentially means an individual. If an individual has personal data, then the privacy laws probably apply, right? As I interact with this site right now, I'm not interacting as a customer. I'm interacting as a website visitor. That's who I am right now. So in terms of the scope, I need to figure out whether this global privacy notice applies to me in my capacity as a website visitor only, or also as a customer of GoDaddy, because the processing of personal data is different, right? When I landed on this website, right, I didn't have to provide my email. I just put the link, the URL in here, and this web page came up. And based off of that action, I'm now a website visitor. But if I log into my GoDaddy portal, I'm now interacting with this organization as a customer. So the processing activities are going to be different, because in order for me to log in, I have to provide them my username and my password. So let's see data covered, okay? This global notice covers personal data when we act as a data controller. Okay? Personal data includes these identifiers. This notice does not apply when our customers or another person processes personal data for their own benefit. For example, when a customer sends an email for their own business purpose, that includes personal data. Now, this is crucial, right? I talked about scope. So this is very important in every privacy notice. You always need to identify scope, always. What is in scope here? Because we can see, based on what they've listed, this notice does not cover certain instances, and it doesn't apply to third-party applications offered through their services. So if you're interacting with this organization through a third-party application, you know that this is not the notice for you. Now, they've used this term, data controller, Personally, I think that this is a very privacy-centric terminology, and I wonder whether or not the audience for this notice are going to understand what this means. So I think it's really important to add additional definitions, and maybe that exists below. We're not going to go into details about that, but there is a lot of work that goes into, one, creating the notice, and the background insights a company needs to provide their privacy lawyer prior to the drafting of these notices to ensure that they accurately reflect what a business is doing internally. Because I had mentioned at the beginning, a notice is not asking for a customer's consent. A notice is telling a customer what is being done based on a business's obligations under the data protection laws where they process personal data. So I really hope you enjoyed this review. If you have comments or questions, leave them below and I'll see you in another review.